Thank you to everyone who has joined. It's a very impressive turnout for this meeting. I hope that many of you are soon to enter a long weekend of rest. So we really appreciate you making the time for this before you do down tools. It's an important stuff, and we very much seek and need your guidance and input. So essentially, it's my honor to welcome you to this global consultation on the mandate in the Progress Declaration, the development of a limited set of indicators by which to better gauge progress on GCM implementation. And I think this was one of the groundbreaking commitments, mandates to emerge from the first International Migration Review Forum. And today we're going to gather to assess the progress made by the network in response to this request. Now, this has been quite an intense journey, which began more or less a year ago, and I really would like to commend colleagues who have been leading it for its thoroughness and how comprehensive it's been. There has been a significant number of consultations and analyses to ensure that, to the extent possible, we are capturing the range of views and suggestions out there. These consultations have taken place at the global level, and they've also taken place regionally. And now we're getting towards the end of that process. In fact, this discussion, which mirrors a global consultation we recently held with member states, and your active participation from the areas that you represent in our migration ecosystem really will be, I think, vital to polishing and refining this proposal. I really do want to thank the co-leads of this exercise, namely UNDESA and IOM. Several of them have joined. You'll be hearing from very shortly. I think the expertise they've brought to this and their dedication to ensuring that this is a truly consultative process has been, I think, something that we should use as a model for all of our work moving forward. So I really am extremely grateful to them. I also am extremely grateful to the rest of the members of the network. This draws on a broad range of perspectives, whether it's from partners in the UN system, or from civil society, or from local authorities and trades unions. And again, quickly scanning the list of participants in the meeting today, I see many of you represented. So thank you very much for your work on this. I'm going to leave it there, because I think the most important thing is to hear from our experts, and then in particular to hear from you. Safe to say that I just wish to reiterate that we are now towards the end of this first phase. These recommendations in one form or another will be in the next Secretary General's biennial report, looking at the status of GCM implementation. That's due to be out probably in the final quarter of this year. It's the first step in this process. It's not the last step by any means. So I think we gently need to turn our minds to, in whatever form they take, how we intend to breathe life into these indicators after the release of the Secretary General's report, so they don't gather dust, and they do actually help us in our ultimate goal to understand better migration dynamics, to understand better how best we can help migrants during the course of their journey. So let's not lose sight of the end goal, even as we come towards the end of this phase. Again, thank you for being here today. And it's now, I think, my pleasure to hand over to Claire Minozzi of UNDESA to take away the overview, and she'll be joined in this by Irene Schufberger of IOM's Global Migration Data Analysis Center. So Claire, Irene, to you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, and it's a pleasure and a privilege to be here today. And thank you for the very kind words acknowledging DASA and IOM's incredible cooperation in this project, and the members who've been outstanding in their dedication and commitment. And of course, we could not have done this work without the support of the network. So thank you to your team as well very much. I have the privilege of starting this presentation, which is going to give you a sense of the complexity and the comprehensiveness of the process that we developed together with you, and the many opportunities we've had to engage with you, of which this is kind of one of the final culminating ones. But I think it's important to take stock of all the conversations we've had and how the project has evolved over time, really building on your feedback and expertise. Next slide, please. So as we know, the mandate for the work of our workstream comes from paragraph 70 of the Progress Declaration of the IMRF, and especially the request that member states made to the Secretary General to put forward a limited set of indicators drawing on global indicator frameworks, including specifically for SDG indicators. And then, of course, the paragraph contains a second request, which is to develop a comprehensive strategy for improving disaggregated migration data. So on the basis of these two complementary requests, the workstream, next slide please, set forth at the end of 2022 to identify in its proposal of the work program some key deliverables that we wanted to ensure we could provide to fulfill the request from member states. And these were essentially four. Three relating to the first part of the paragraph and the limited set of indicators, and the fourth relating to the comprehensive strategy for improving disaggregation. So the first three were conducting a mapping of relevant approaches for measuring governance of migration in general, but specifically in relation to the GCM. And second, to put forward a proposal for a limited set of indicators building on existing indicator frameworks and data collection processes. And lastly, in order to do these, the previous tasks, in particular, the limited set of indicators, that we would do so through consultative process that would involve member states and all relevant stakeholders. And the fourth deliverable instead would be specific to the comprehensive strategy for improving disaggregated migration data. So in today's presentation, Irene and I are going to focus primarily on the first three deliverables. Thank you. Next slide, please. So when we started, we had this very clear mandate from Para 70, but we also needed to have more details from you about what actually you wanted from this proposal for a limited set of indicators. What does it mean to be limited? How comprehensive was it? And so forth. And so we envisioned a series of steps. And the first step was to have a canvassing of your opinions. And on the basis of that, then we would conduct mappings and then put forward the first version of the proposal. Next slide, please. So these first set of steps that we undertook between January 2023 and June, each one is, I'm going to go through them in some detail, but you can see the QR codes on the side. And for each one, you can find a more detailed report providing a lot more richness and depth. So I encourage you, if you haven't already done so, to take a look at some of this material, which is all on the UN Migration Network's webpage. But the first task really was to reach out to you and to find out from stakeholders and member states how this limited set of indicators was going to help support monitoring the GCM. And we received a very high response. We were extremely pleased. We had almost 100 respondents from all regions, including 33 individual government entities. And the takeaway from the survey really was that you see this as a tool for monitoring progress over time, that it should be grounded in the guiding principles of the GCM, that it should enhance the ability to inform evidence-based policy making, and that to the extent possible, it should really build on a great methodology and identify gaps in the implementation of the GCM. So these are very critical because they show us that we need to build on existing indicator frameworks, which is indeed in the text of the Para 70. And we need to make sure that the data is timely and relevant and is closely aligned with the principles of the GCM. Next slide, please. So on the basis of that, and in taking in consideration the work plan of the work stream, we started to conduct the mappings. And initially, we had thought we would only conduct one mapping, but then we realized that the information was so complex that we actually needed to conduct two. And the first was a mapping of indicator frameworks. And the second, which I will then discuss in the next slide, is the mapping of indicators themselves. So go back, please. So in the indicator framework mapping, we reached out to academics, experts, and so forth, and we identified 31 individual indicator frameworks. These were from different countries, different parts of the world, different areas of expertise and different scope, but essentially 16 had been developed by academic institutions, 3 by civil society, and 12 by international organizations or processes facilitated by international organizations. And we took these 31 indicator frameworks and we compared them on the basis of 5 criteria that had been identified in consultation with the members of the work stream. And among these criteria, one was that the indicator framework had been endorsed by an intergovernmental body, which I think is incredibly important because it means that it has a very high status in the UN system, obviously. We also looked at the relevance of the indicator framework in terms of GCM objectives and principles. We looked at timeliness and of availability of the data, because if we are putting forward a proposal, it is important that the data are already available and are relatively timely, meaning that they are available for a point in time that is recent enough to be used. So on the basis of these criteria, 7 indicator frameworks stood out for having fulfilled the largest number, and 2 fulfilled all 5 criteria, and 5 fulfilled 4 criteria. And among these were the SDG indicator frameworks, the indicators proposed by the UN expert group on migration statistics, the MGI indicators, and the IDAC indicator frameworks, just to mention a few. Next slide, please. So we took the 7 indicator frameworks and we looked at all the indicators that were contained therein. And of course, many overlapped across the indicator frame, and that was deliberate because, of course, the UN expert group and the IDAC deliberately sought to use SDG indicators whenever they could. So we identified from these 7 indicator frameworks over 400 indicators that were relevant. And we compared them again based on criteria that were identified in collaboration and consultation with the membership. Some of these were the same as for mapping 1, but some were specific to the indicators themselves. And I think the most relevant is additional criteria is the agreed methodology, which, as you saw in the previous slides, had been identified as key in the survey, in the canvassing survey that we sent, and you sent back to us as a clear message that it should have an agreed methodology to the extent possible. And so on the basis of this, we then conducted in-depth discussions with the members, and we ranked the indicators based on their relevance for the objectives of the GCM. And we had in-depth discussions about which ones could be included or not. And we identified the ones that we considered core and the ones that were considered additional. Next slide, please. So we finalized this first version of the proposal at the end of June, and 20 indicators were put forward as core, meaning that they were the most relevant based on our assessment for the GCM objectives, and they filled as many criteria as possible from mapping 2. We also identified 41 additional indicators that were, 41 additional indicators that were also deemed to be extremely important and relevant, but were of slightly subordinated importance, either because the data wasn't available for all regions and countries, or because they were more focused on one of the actions, but not necessarily the scope, the breadth of the objective as a whole. So again, we conducted extensive consultations with the members and received extremely valuable feedback on how to prioritize these indicators. Next slide, please. So having put forward this first version, the first preliminary proposal, we knew that that was just the first step. And what we needed then was to receive feedback from you on how well it met the demand. So we started with what is the third deliverable of our work plan, which is the consultations. And we decided to first conduct 5 regional consultations with looking really in depth at the first version of the proposal and getting feedback from you on that. We then conducted a survey, an online survey, where we gave an opportunity to give much more detailed feedback, also propose alternatives, provide areas for you to address in terms of the scope, the number, and so forth. And we opened up a space for extensive consultations with the members and others who reached out to us for bilateral and other types of meetings. And on the basis of that, then we revised the proposal. And this work took place between July of 2023 and the end of the year, December 2023. Next slide, please. So the regional consultations, there was 5 of them for the regions of Africa, the Arab states, Asia and Pacific, Latin America, and the Caribbean, Europe and North America. And we had an extremely active participation from representatives of member states, statisticians, civil society representatives. We were extremely happy with the engagement and the feedback. We also benefited from interventions from keynote speakers in each of these presentations who have then participated subsequently in the global consultations. So we were extremely privileged to get the feedback, and some of the reactions, I think, to the first proposal were quite positive. But at the same time, we received clear indications of areas for improvement and strengthening. For example, for the consultation on Africa, there was clear emphasis on having more information on diasporas and their engagement. From the Arab states region, we've got feedback that we needed to strengthen the dimensions related to labor and labor protection and the social services, and in relation to Latin America and the Caribbean and Europe and North America, there was a strong call to ensure that the indicators were also more clearly focused on being gender disaggregated and having greater emphasis on child sensitivity. So some of these aspects we've definitely tried to adjust in the revised proposal. Next slide, please. The survey that we conducted then, based on the first version of the proposal, was between August and September. And we received 48 responses from all regions, and about half were from government entities. And again, the feedback was very useful and very concrete. We asked about the number of indicators proposed, both the core and the additional, whether that was appropriate, and the relevance of the indicators put forward, and how well they align with the guiding principles. And the feedback was very helpful. We got some detailed written comments about alternative indicators, alternative language, ways to make sure that it was more closely aligned to the language of the GCM. And we tried to reflect that in our revision. Next slide, please. So unfortunately, Irene would be taking over, but they are having some issues in Berlin. So I will continue the presentation. So we finalized, based on the feedback from the regional consultations and from the survey, we revised the proposal, and we put forward, instead of 20 indicators that were core, we revised it to 26, excuse me, and 76 additional indicators. So we broadened the list, the number, and the coverage. We also added a new element which hadn't been included in the first version of the proposal, which are the key background information and statistics. In order to put forward this revised proposal, we conducted extensive consultations with the members. We met to discuss indicators for each objective, objective by objective, and we looked at all the comments we had received through the survey and through the discussions held with you over the summer. Next slide, please. So this gives you a sort of a visual of how the core and additional indicators are structured. We had 26 core indicators, and compared to the previous proposal, we had 2 core indicators for each objective compared to 1 or 2. They sort of varied in the first version. And the 10 of the core indicators are from the SDG indicator frameworks, 15 from the MGI, and 1 is from the IDAC. So all of the core indicators proposed are from existing frameworks. And I think this is something that's very important, because it means that the data are already available, are already collected, and are widely available for a time series as well for many of the indicators, which means it can already be used to monitor progress and change over time. The additional indicators, many of them also come from these frameworks, but in addition, 18 new indicators were put forward, and these do not have an agreed methodology because they're new. In developing these new indicators that are proposed in this version, we tried to very much adhere to the language of the GCM, because this was one of the elements we received feedback from you on, that we should try to strictly adhere to the language of the GCM for anything that was new. And several of the core indicators are also additional, which means that they can be used as multi-purpose, which was part of our design. Thank you. Next slide, please. So in this slide, you can see a visual display of the indicators, which indicator framework from mapping 1 they come from. And the circles that are filled in mean that the indicators are core and or additional. And you can see that all of the core indicators come from MGI and SDG indicator frameworks and IDAC. Some of the new indicator frameworks, some of the new indicators are all considered additional, which is we're trying to limit the burden on member states, excuse me, and in particular on national statistical offices to collect new information, which can be time-consuming, costly, and often requires many years to develop a new indicator. So hence the attempt to really limit the new indicators to the ones that are non-core. Next slide, please. Here you can see a visual representation of the number of core and additional indicators in the two proposals. The first one, which is the lighter colored, and the darker color, and the revised proposal, which is the lighter color. And what you can see is first that the core indicators now are much more evenly balanced, two for each objective, instead of the sort of one or two difference for the first. So I think this responds to the request from you to be more balanced and comprehensive in the core, in the proposal for the core indicators. And then you can see that we've tried to address the concern that for some of the additional indicators also we had gaps or not sufficient number to meet the requirements. We also tried to reduce the number of indicators and some of the additional indicators for some of the objectives where you had told us that we had proposed too many. Next slide, please. So you can see here that we also tried to take into account your very useful feedback with regard to the guiding principles. And from the very first, that was one of the aspects that was most critical to all member states and stakeholders, was that the proposal was balanced in terms of reflecting those. So you can see that we're still not there in terms of complete balance, but I think we're trying to improve, and especially with the additional, I think there was an attempt to really make a more balanced in terms of especially the child sensitive and the gender responsive, which was one of the clear aspects you had identified as a limitation of the first version of the proposal. We also tried to, in the core, to cover more clearly the human rights principle in much more depth, and also the people-centered aspects. So I think this gives you a sense of how the revised proposal is trying to adjust and better meet the needs of member states, and also reflect the comments from you and stakeholders. Next slide, please. So one of the innovations of the revised proposal was to put forward a set of key background information and statistics in addition to the core and additional indicators. And the idea is to have data that's widely already available in existing data sets that are estimated or compiled by international organizations, including the World Bank, ILO, UNESCO, IOM, DASA. And to make them available as a sort of a key way to complement the indicators. And we identified 10 key background statistics that range from information on the number and proportion of international migrants in total resident population, as well as the number in focusing on destination as well as on country of origin. We also put forward the idea of having information on flows, so the number of immigrants by sex and the number of emigrants by sex. In addition, information on migrant workers, on students, and on remittances, which is one of the critical aspects in many of the development-related objectives of the GCM. We feel strongly that these indicators are also grounded in the work of the UN expert group on migration statistics that was endorsed by the Statistical Commission. There was an attempt to align these indicators with that. So I think it is also, there's a complementarity there in the process. Next slide, please. And in addition to these core statistics, we also propose to include information on the ratification of conventions and other international legal instruments that are explicitly referenced in the Global Compact. And these range from ILO conventions to UN conventions, and I think they are critical. Next slide, please. So the revised proposal that is the basis of our discussion today takes into consideration all this feedback and all the process up to here, and it we conducted we've conducted a survey to get feedback from you on this revised proposal, and to see how well it's adjusting to your needs and so forth. So the survey was conducted between January and February, and it's unfortunately has a much lower response rate than some of the previous surveys that we've conducted with you. And that's kind of to be expected with these processes, as we get a bit of attrition going forward. But essentially, we got responses from all regions and 12 government entities. And we have a sense from your feedback that the proposal, the revised proposal, is relevant for the scope of the objectives of the GCM. It reflects the guiding principles adequately, and it builds on the existing reporting requirements. The proposal for the key background information, I think, has been seen quite positively as reinforcing the proposal. Next slide, please. So here you can see information on the inclusion of the key background information and strengthening the proposal. And we have extremely high, I think, response, especially from the respondents overall, and quite high also from the government entities in particular, perhaps less so for the inclusion of the conventions and international legal instruments from the governments. Next slide, please. And here you can also see the response to the survey from governments and all respondents in terms of the number of indicators and additional indicators, how appropriate they are. And you can see that their variability across the objectives with, for example, objective 1, all respondents, both government entities and all the others, including stakeholders, seeing that the number of core indicators proposed is appropriate, versus others where there's still a sense that there are either too many or too few. We have the detailed information there, which we will then use in our next phase to try to adjust the final version of the proposal. But you can see for the additional indicators, the number, there's still some area for improvement. We have some of the objectives, the number of indicators proposed is definitely still considered, in many cases, too many. In some, it's too few, and we'll have to go objective by objective to sort of rebalance, taking into consideration the feedback received, the specific feedback received. Next slide, please. And so here you can see in terms of the relevance, not just in terms of the number, whether it's appropriate, but the relevance of the indicators proposed in terms of core and additional for the scope of the objective. And again, you can see some variability, but quite high level of agreement, above 50% for all the core indicators for both all respondents and governments. For the additional indicators, you can see there's objective 17, they're slightly lower, but in general, it's quite high. And of course, again, we will be reviewing in detail. For objective 2, we know, for example, that from the feedback received in the survey, that some of the respondents have indicated that we should consider looking at drivers that relate to security as well. There's some emphasis on also in relation to objective 13, comments on the relevance of the language For some of the additional indicators, we have received feedback on some of the indicators proposed in relation to access to services, to make sure that the indicator proposed in the language is well aligned with the scope of the GCM. So this is just to give you some of the preliminary sense of the feedback received. Next slide, please. So the next steps and what we're doing now. So the survey, we just shared with you some of the results. We've completed the final survey to get information on this proposal. We are conducting the consultations, the 2 global consultations, the one with member states in February, which is already concluded, and this one today, which is with stakeholders. After that, we will take all the feedback received from you through the survey and the global consultations and other interactions we've had with you from interested counterparts who've been reaching out to us. And we will put forward a final revision of the proposal, trying to adjust and to take into account all the elements that need to be reflected. It is critical for us to hear from you today. We're extremely excited to be here and have the opportunity to hear areas where you think the proposal has improved and areas where we still need to do better. It is a balancing exercise where we really need to reflect on different views and different perspectives, but it's, as Jonathan said in the introduction, an important starting point, I think, for us. The final step, of course, will be to include the proposal in the SG's report, but before that, it will be submitted for consideration to the executive committee. Next slide, please. So I think that concludes my presentation. I hope it gives you a sense. I'm sorry it was so dense, but I hope it gives you a sense of the thoroughness and the complexity and the many opportunities we've tried to create really to engage with you. And we very much look forward.
Thank you also for taking over from Irina, who I understand was evacuated from the building by a false fire alarm. So I appreciate you being able to step into the breach and provide such a great analysis. I now think that we move. Is this the stage where we move straight into hearing from Ellen? I think that's correct. Yeah. So Ellen, I'm really pleased that you're able to be with us today. I'm not sure. I think it's a civilized hour for you. I certainly hope it is. Ellen, of course, is at the International Union for the Scientific Study of Populations. So I would be very happy to give you the virtual floor, Ellen.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Can you all hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, thank you so much. It's truly an honor to participate in this critical moment in the evolving life course at probably now the adolescence of the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration. Claire, you did a wonderful job. It wasn't dense at all. It was needed. You provided the framework for your work, and we can understand the density of it, the intricacy of it, and the attention to detail and the attention to the feedback that you've gotten. So thank you so very much. And thank you, Jonathan, Mr. Prentice, for your excellent leadership in the network's embrace and encouragement of inclusion and creativity throughout this work stream, and the careful and caring work of Marcia Porras and also Irene Schaufberger, who has welcomed me into this process. And the talents of each of you here. I'm looking 137 participants so far, representatives of member states, national statistical offices, civil society. Your work, your talents must be acknowledged and very much appreciated. Last summer, during the regional consultations, our colleague, Patty Singyanga Knudsen, from whom you will hear in a few minutes, expressed the import of these moments in laying the foundation for essentially effective public policy, international policy, regarding migration and migrants in this 21st century. I must personally recall, I want to take a moment, the quiet and committed work of a person, Susan Alsner, who in the spring and summer of 2016, as head of the New York office of the United Nations Non-Governmental Liaison Service, worked to bring the voices of civil society to bear in the formal consultations for the New York Declaration on Migration. Susan was committed to enlarging the table and embracing inclusion, and I think we are all the beneficiaries of her good work. During the regional meeting for Latin America, our friend Marcela Cerruti reminded why such commitment is so significant. A delineated set of indicators will improve the review of the progress in the implementation of the Global Compact and to generate periodic, consistent, and comparable information to inform empirically, reliably, validly migration and migrant policies and programs, all situated within the context of and in harmony with sustainable development and human rights. We should never lose sight of the inherent rightness of the Global Compact. Based on the processes of consultation, we observed modification, changes in the set of indicators that we are considering this afternoon or this morning concerning the objectives and guiding principles of the Compact. And we have excellent summaries of the regional consultations and the results of the online survey prepared by the UN Network, and I commend these resources to you. The evolution of the proposed system, as Claire has described, to make it more, I love this phrase, more relevant and more fit for purpose, is evident in both the general and specific revisions in response to the inputs and interventions of member states and stakeholders. First, we see shifts in emphases and perspective. For example, in both the regional consultations and the results of the survey, participants underscored the complexities and multi-dimensions of human migration and population movements, the critical role of conflict and environmental change as causes and correlates of migration and displacement, the significance of gender and age, and specifically youth in migration dynamics. These perspectives on migration processes resonate in critical ways with the next generation of international migration scholars. I'm currently collaborating with colleagues at the Center for Migration Studies in editing a special issue of International Migration Review to celebrate its 60th year. The theme of this issue is new and evolving models of international migration and population movements, new theories, new perspectives. And the response to the call for papers has been outstanding. Emerging scholars from all over the world are asking new questions, pursuing new methodologies in answering those questions. And as I read and listen to the interventions of the constituencies participating in this process, in the implementation of the Global Compact, I hear the same passion to bring new perspective to the project of migration in this century in pursuit of safe and humane migration pathways. There is indeed momentum for the co-production of data, analysis, and interpretation. And following Mr. Prentice's call for using the data, we need co-analysis of all of these data, valuable data that are about to be or are being collected. And we need feed into evidence-based policies at all scales of analysis, local, national, regional, and global. Second, the consultations have also recognized and are highly value the general need for both international as well as national indicators of progress, aligned with existing international frameworks. This is highly valued by stakeholders. And the excellent work of the expert groups on migration statistics is particularly recognized. Third, expressed throughout the consultation process is the value of international and intranational collaboration and coordination. I argued that this very process of the development of the delineated systems of indicators, the work in which we are engaged today, is highly consistent with Objective 23 of the Global Compact to strengthen international cooperation and global partnerships for safe, orderly, and regular migration. I'll return to this point very soon at the end of my remarks. Fourth, specific changes to the system of indicators is the notable inclusion of the 10 key background statistics that Claire just described. I'm going to draw from an American movie. You had me at the number or proportion of international migrants in the total resident population by sex and age, the number of international migrations in the migrants in the total population by country or area of origin by sex and age. I have fallen in love, and yes, I don't get out that much, clearly, again, and as always, with the importance of demography, the demography of international migration and population flows and stocks as context for policy relevant research and policy debates. To be sure, the centering role of the population sciences in international policy analysis has been the unifying theme of our scientific panel of the U.S. Navy. The key background statistics exemplify the importance of empirically grounding the progress toward the objectives and the guiding principles of the Global Compact in population analysis as a complement, not as an end in its own right, but to feed into the more delicate, the more intricate, the more nuanced components of policy analysis. And of course, I always want more demography, more population analyses. And I would encourage the inclusion of the age in several of the other statistical accounts, notably key background statistics 3 and 4, such that the number of immigrants and emigrants be disaggregated by age as well as gender. Because disaggregation in general lays the foundation for comparative analysis, and thereby the analysis of migrant selectivity and migrant differentials. These analytic stepping stones take us towards explanation and a basis for modeling. And there's such excellent work being done in research across the globe in migration. Have in this proposed system that you are considering, that you are framing, the potential to fuel new knowledge generation. Fifth, and I'm coming to the end, issues of capacity and the budgetary demands of implementation of a system of indicators does emerge specifically from both the consultations and the online survey, particularly from member states and NSOs. The theme leads away from the possibilities of the implementation of the Global Compact and more towards constraints and challenges to charting progress. On this theme, and moving towards my conclusion, I would suggest returning to Objective 3, that is, to strengthen international cooperation and global partnerships for migration, to think more strategically about collaboration and cooperation in pursuit of acting upon the objectives and values, principles of the compact. Ways of leveraging cooperation, that is, sharing and exchange of resources, human and financial, reduce budgetary impact and build capacity and resources devoted to migration and sustainable development. For example, synergetic of the Global Compact save lives and establish coordinated international efforts on missing migrants. Indicator 2 is whether or not the country has systems in place, including agreements with other countries, migrants. Of capital capacity in countries, we think about that access, relationship, efficiencies, and caution, and ultimately, and benefit migrants and migrants, all linked together. In the regional consultation for Africa, that's a project called for integrated migration systems that include international migration and population movements in national accounts, census taking, national as well as subnational surveys, civil and vital registration systems. Inherent in this vision, such a wonderful vision it is the role of coordination within national statistical and data systems, the sharing of information, and more generally, could native approach to international cooperation the cause. More broadly, could international cooperation become a cornerstone in realizing the objectives and acting on them? I realize these are audacious questions. It's an audacious argument offered with some historical irony. The earliest expression of the Global Compact, the Zero Draft, issued in February 2018. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. That draft emerged from the preparatory and consultative processes following the New York Declaration. That Zero Draft included 22 objectives, not 23. And Bela Hovey, I'd love to hear your recollections about this process. The Zero Draft was the basis for the intergovernmental negotiations held by the General Assembly between February and July 2018. So think about these dates. During this process, the 23rd objective was added. And this was a recognition that this objective for international cooperation and partnerships was going to be particularly relevant to coordinate the implementation both of the Global Compact and the SDGs. It is a bold argument now as well to make that cooperation and collaboration, share and exchange, let's face it, friendships and relationship building, interrelationships and problem solving will be the roots by which safe, orderly, and regular migration is realized locally and globally. And in fact, these are the very processes in which you and your colleagues are engaged today. Your serious and your collaborative and cooperative consideration of the challenges at hand regarding migration and migrants is, I believe, deeply relevant to the health and vitality of our communities, our landscapes, and our environments. I believe in the inherent rightness of the Global Compact in this regard. It connects to every other corner of our world, our shared world. And the courage and importance of the work that each and every one of you is in pursuit today is part of that process. I thank you for this opportunity to witness your work and perhaps contribute to it. I wish you good speed, and now we should get on to the work introduced by Mr. Prentice to use these data in pursuit of the common good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ellen, very much indeed. I'm just going to seek guidance from my colleague Marcia as to what the next steps are. I'm conscious as well that we've been here for some time and we need to hear from the many participants that are out there. But if my understanding is correct, we're now going to move on to a discussion of those objectives that are under cluster one, and that this discussion will be led by Irem Arf, of the International Trade Union Confederation. So Marcia is nodding that I haven't lost control of the meeting. So I'm going to hand over to Irem, please.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I hope you can all hear me.
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much for the presentation as well, Ellen and Claire, which is very helpful. I think sets the scene and gives an overview also for collecting the inputs. As introduced, I'm from International Trade Union Confederation, which represents around 200 million workers worldwide, and we have been part of this work stream since its inception and engaging very closely, which I believe shouldn't be a surprise considering migration happens either for work, or migrants, when they are in a different country, take up work or look for work. So for us, this is a very, very important issue. And we believe that trade unions have to be at the table whenever migration issues are being discussed to ensure migrant workers' rights are upheld, and also policies decided upon and the way they are implemented is also accepted by the wider society. The process has had its challenges, trying to keep to existing and state-endorsed indicators for this very variety of GCM objectives, and making them, finding the most relevant ones that are fitting the objectives have been challenging. But I would really like to thank to the co-chairs of this work stream from UNDESA and IOM, so Claire and Irene, for their outstanding work in leading this work stream in a very, very inclusive manner, along with the excellent support from Marcia Porras from the UN Network Secretariat. As they have presented, there have been intensive consultations within the work stream, but also many layers of consultations with stakeholders, UN agencies that are not part of the work stream, and member states through different means. So congratulations, Claire, Irene, and Marcia. Without further ado, I would like to pass the word to Paul Tacon from ILO, who is the labor migration specialist at the International Labour Organization, who will provide some general observations on the proposal, focusing on specific objectives. So objective 2 on adverse drivers, 5 on pathways, 6 on fair recruitment and decent work, 12 on screening and referral, and 18 on skills. Passing on to Paul. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Irem. And I'd just like to echo my thanks to everyone involved in the process. I think this has just been a really excellent collaboration, and I hope that the results are satisfying to everyone. We're certainly very happy with how things have gone. I note the time. I really want to say as little as possible because we want to hear from you. I think I will just then say a very brief word that, you know, there's obviously a lot of challenges in trying to sort of get a very accurate picture or develop a set of indicators that can give an accurate picture with sort of limited data and the limitations that we all know about, and the need to make this realistic and practical. So I think that what has come out is a very good way of looking at drivers, looking at the adverse economic drivers, lack of decent work, and the risk of climate change, because that's becoming more and more important. With pathways, the attempt to capture different kinds of pathways, fair recruitment, fair and ethical recruitment, and decent work. Here I would just say a quick word that we understand that there are, and I think we would be very interested in your insights on the use of SDG indicator 10.7.1, because this is, we do know that there are some questions about this coming from member states, and I think if there is strong support for this, then it would be very helpful for you to voice that. And looking at objective 12, we're looking at how to make these, make sure that information is accurate and procedures are more straightforward. And finally, in regards to objective 18 on skill recognition and development, we're looking at both opportunities for sort of unilateral recognition of skills and skill cooperation. I'm really going to leave it there. I'm really keen to hear from participants here. So I'll hand it back to Iram. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul, and also for the very quick intervention so that we can hear more from the floor. And I think it's sets the scene, providing the core indicators that we had focused on. For us, of course, as trade unions, decent work has been particularly important, and so this cluster is particularly relevant for our work. And this is the kind of perspective we try to bring. But without further ado, I believe we already have our first speaker from the floor, Timo from Platform for Displacement, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you, Ira, and Platform on Disaster Displacement, precisely. Thanks so much. I hope you can hear me. First, let me express also sincere thanks to the co-leads of the work stream, UNDIS and IOM, as well as Marcia Porras, of course, for their stewardship and hard work in driving this process. As Iram said, my name is Timo from the PDD. We're also a member of the indicators work stream. For us of particular relevance are Objective 2 on addressing drivers, including climate change and disasters, but also Objective 5 on enhancing pathways for regular migration. PDD is also specifically mentioned under Objective 2. First, as a member of the workstream, let me just acknowledge that the indicator framework includes a few indicators of relevance to the context of climate change and disasters. So under Objective 2, for example, there is a core indicator on DRR strategies with specific provisions for addressing the displacement impacts of disasters. And there are also 3 additional indicators that talk about disaster risks and environmental degradation, broadly speaking. Under Objective 5, there is a core indicator on whether or not the government has a national policy or strategy for regular migration pathways, and an additional indicator on temporary stay or temporary protection. So overall, the existing framework strength really lies in its potential to capture progress in these broader areas of policymaking and being based on the SDG and MGI frameworks, particularly SDG 10.7.2. They also build on existing methodology and established indicators while doing so. At the same time, of course, this broader scope also suggests there may be room to align these indicators more closely with some of the nuances of these GCM objectives. This could include, for example, an explicit mention of people compelled to leave their homes in the context of disasters, climate change, and environmental degradation, as mentioned in the GCM Objective 5G and H, which aligns with input by other colleagues, as well as the broader work of the network, and specifically that of the work stream on regular pathways and the guidance note that was developed under this work stream. So this could fill an important gap in the framework, plus the added bonus of strengthening this dimension could be that enhancing regular pathways is, of course, one of IOM's 3 key priorities in their new strategic plan and global appeal. So clearly that's an area where we will see progress in the coming years, and therefore also need to capture it. So those are just some reflections on the framework and the progress so far. And to conclude, we really welcome further dialogue on this dimension. Would like to hear from colleagues online. If the framework is set up to aptly capture progress on these dimensions, where you perhaps see some need for further refinements. And really just to thank again also the colleagues for the excellent stewardship and hard work in getting this process together. So with that, back to you, Ida. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Timo. And with the time constraint, I jumped directly ahead, but I wanted to also say, please turn on your cameras when you take the floor so that we can see you if you can. Thanks, Timo, for doing that. And if you would like to take the floor, you can use your hand button, as was mentioned at the beginning as well. And that please try to also keep your interventions to 2 minutes so that we can have more. I see initially Neha Misra's hand up from Solidarity Center. Please, Neha, your turn.
Thank you so much, Iram. And as everyone said, I'm so grateful to the team that put together these indicators. It is one of the most difficult things whenever indicators are always hard. So thank you so much. I wanted to reiterate the importance of the core indicator related to the level of national compliance with labor rights, and in particular, the freedom of association and collective bargaining. I'm very happy to see it as one of the core indicators. And I think it's important to have it be a part of an indicator as part of other objectives in addition to Objective 6. In particular, I think Objective 2, 5, 7, and 17 would be important to have that indicator attached to it related to freedom of association and collective bargaining. When we're talking about minimizing adverse drivers or the creation of pathways for regular migration, addressing vulnerabilities of migrants, and eliminating all forms of discrimination, the ability of workers to exercise their agency, their collective agency through the freedom of association and collective bargaining is essential to meet the goals of those objectives as well. So in addition to Objective 6 and 16, I think objectives 2, 5, 7, and 17 would be very important to have the level of national compliance with labor rights indicators attached to it, especially in relation to freedom of association and collective bargaining. Thanks so much, Irem.
Thank you very much for your inputs as well, Neha. I see Greg Chen from Apindo. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Irem. I'm actually really glad to have gone through the presentation just now. I think it's very comprehensive. There's some feedback I would like to give in the interest of the workers. I do agree with our colleagues that the workers need to be protected. Now, having said that, and referring directly to the slide, I would just like to add some recommendations that I hope can be narrowed down and more focused and refined during future discussions. And that is that these days, in 2024, the last 5 years in particular, social media has played a very large role in terms of ensuring that decent work takes place, and if there's any abuses, that they are reported. Right. In Indonesia, where I come from, where the country I represent today through our Employers Association, recently there was some, very recently actually, there's been some big issue about foreign workers in Germany who basically come in the form of interns. Right. So they go to Germany as with an opportunity to become an intern. They go to university. It's being set up by our government in conjunction with some universities, but nevertheless, things did not go as expected, and now it's made a big news in our country. Now, having said that, what I observed is that many workers they're just not aware, right? They would trust whoever has communicated to them what the process will be, but they really don't know where to go if there are problems. However, in the last 5 years, they have been very active to report everything on social media, right? We see that even with passengers on airlines, people having other problems, and the authorities react to social media, actually, right? They react even faster, you can say, arguably, through reports through social media, whether that's an airline, there's the local police, and so on and so forth. So my recommendation that I would like to share to the group is that perhaps we need a platform here. I see a lot of discussions and data gathering through formal institutions like the maybe different government institutions, some from the private sector, but perhaps there should be a platform that is managed, I don't know whether through the UN or through the ILO or through different other stakeholders, where workers can easily report either through social media or through this platform, very similar to like a website like TripAdvisor or Go.com or Expedia, where workers can give real-time information on how they feel, whether their employers are doing a good job or not, whether they are given what they've been promised, right? In terms of wages, in terms of contract, in terms of visa or residency issues, right? Whether there's been corruption in the immigration or emigration process, because we've also heard that from origin countries, sometimes the workers are quote unquote squeezed by the local authorities, right? So they are put in debt bondage even before they leave, and not by the private sector, but also by some corrupt officials. So if we have a platform, and I haven't seen this discussed as much as perhaps it can be, we have a platform based on on social media where we can all track it together, and that becomes part of the indicator to address some of these core indicators. I hope that would be something that could help protect the workers, make sure the private sector is also being honest, and that the government can then react and be proactive on a real-time basis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the inputs as well, Greg. I think also that gives us some idea in terms of how to collect certain data. So once the indicators are up, so how do we collect the data to make the assessments? I will be happy to share one similar example of such a platform in the link in the chat. I will give the floor now to Fabian Wilches, followed by Rashid Lafier. Sorry if I'm saying your names wrongly, and I didn't see the organization. So if you could please tell your organizations, that would be great. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. My name is Fabian Wilches from the Lutheran World Federation based in Geneva. We actually have different suggestions, even to add perhaps some extra indicators to the objectives. And I'm going to do it quickly, but the question is if we can send by written suggestions later. So if you can indicate who should we send them, because we need to speak quickly. So the first one is an objective 2. We would like to suggest to add footnote, and we realize that you have different footnotes along the document, which we think are helpful to understand what some of them are about. So to add a footnote on objective 2 on point 6, when it talks about environmental degradation and adverse effects of climate change, we would like to suggest to add as causes intensive exploitation of natural resources and prioritization of commercial water use over human consumption. Then in the same objective 2, we are missing an indicator on access to land, and we would like to suggest to add the SDG indicator 2.3.2 on average income of small-scale food producers by sex and indigenous status. The same, it would be to add one indicator on land property, and that would be, for example, the proportion of population that have access to land, including inheritance rights for women, and collective property of indigenous land. And in the same objective 2, we're missing something on armed violence and security. So we're proposing to include at least one of the SDGs indicators, which is 16.1.2, that is conflict-related deaths. Now, on objective 5, we would like to also indicate something about migration of indigenous peoples, cross-border migration of indigenous peoples, which I know it hasn't been addressed that much, but if there is any indigenous people or organization, I would love to hear from them on this cross-border migration of indigenous peoples. And finally, for this cluster 1, objective 6, we're missing something on access to justice for migrant workers. So we would like to suggest to include an indicator of whether or not exists efficient, affordable, and expedited access to justice mechanisms for migrant workers to address wage theft, exploitation, harassment, or job loss, or access to unemployment, and to include in that new indicator the footnote number 11 in page 18, which refers to access to justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fabian, for this rich contribution. I will ask our colleagues from the UN Network Secretariat to let us know how, if there are some room for written contributions at this point, and pass to Rashid Lafier, and after that to Tonya Rifaye. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Rashid Lafier from the African German Working Community. It's an umbrella organization in development cooperation based in Berlin. I have 2 general questions. The first is I still don't understand with what definition of migrant the GCM is working. This was a topic already in July. I think it would be very important to give in the to formulate a working definition. This is one point. And it should not be too narrow, the definition, and neither too broad. So because the different people feel addressed by different paragraphs, by different objectives. This is one point. The second point is that I don't understand who will control that the indicators are met. I mean, if the states control themselves, I don't see too much the point. So which other organization will be in charge? I think it would be important also to recommend a procedure to the state and to make and to formulate this procedure quite clearly in the text. Thank you. These were my 2 remarks.
Thank you very much for your inputs as well, for clarifications in particular, this request. Tonya, and followed by Hernan Ruggiero from Segretariat Argentina.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this great forum. I represent the World Health Organization, the Eastern Mediterranean Regional Office. I think that it's extremely important that we recommend to have Objective 15 as one of the core, as part of the core indicators, and have some sort of indicator on the migrant access to healthcare services. This is linked to SDG 3 and particularly 3.4, which is access to universal health coverage. So this is a recommendation that I think is extremely important as health is a human right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think specifically Objective 15 will be covered also following in the following sessions. I pass the word to Hernan Ruggiero from Segretariat, and then Shakil Akhtar Shavduri from Bangladesh Union Confederation.
¿Qué tal? ¿Se me escucha?
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Hannah.
Okay. Bueno, primero agradecer.
Well, first off, I'd like to thank you for all of the work that's been done by the network and this process, which has been described very well from the onset. I think that particularly the accompaniment of the CCA, CCI, and thank you so much for this participation, and through this the trade unions were able to also participate, and thank you for all of the punctual opportunities to speak. I think that it's really important to speak about indicators as a tool so as to construct public policies that are based in evidence, that are evidence-based. And so by the serious nature of the situation that, for example, my country is going through at the moment, Argentina, as regards violations of labor rights and social rights. And so we know that we're talking about thousands of people being laid off illegally, and we can see that there's a situation, a complex situation there where labor migration is a situation where we're going backwards and where migration is seen as a national security issue and not as a dimension that's based on human rights, which is something that obviously from trade union sectors we call for. So we have to strengthen this perspective of migration based on human rights, and that's why it's so important that we have these indicators that make reference to freedom of association and freedom to trade unionize and collective bargaining. I think that this is all really important for workers in general and migrant workers in particular. I was very happy to hear the mention of these topics such as decent work and climate change, skills recognition, etc. These are all issues that we've been working on, more particularly in different regions and in this region in particular. And we really do feel and hope that we'd be able to align our different agendas with the trade unions that work on the GCM. It's very, very relevant indeed. So we can see if we can strengthen our trade unions mutually so that we can actually carry out activities and actions that have to do with the GCM, but also to be able to carry out follow-up. Because who's going to follow this up? This is a question that was made. Who's going to follow this up? Is this going to come from the trade union sector, from civil society? And it's really, really great. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak. I know that our time is limited. Thanks for giving me the floor.
Thank you very much, Hernan. Very quickly, I pass the word to Brother Shakil, followed by Binod Kadria. Thank you.
Thank you, Irem. My name is Shakil Akhtar Chaudhary. I'm from Bangladesh. As you know that Bangladesh is one of the champion country for migration. We have 14 million migrant workers who is still working outside the country, where more than 1 million are women. So, first of all, I sincerely thank to the work stream for hard working and presentation. You provided detailed and analytic statements and figuring out the facts on migration around the globe. Actually, you involve multi-stakeholders, including trade unions, in the table today. There are also civil societies and academias. I think right to organize and collective bargaining to protect and to uphold decent work for all is very important aspect. And as you know that in Bangladesh, there is a NAP, National Action Plan, which was guided by the European Union and ILO roadmap, which is concerning that the right to organize and collective bargaining, which is very important in our context. We should also take into account human right due diligence as a tool for protection workers' rights in the whole supply chain. So if you look on the GCM number 6 and SDG number 8, which both of those are very much concerned to decent work. So these are very important aspects that we can all look into. And I again thank the work stream for their excellent hardworking presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Shakil. I'm also very happy to hear collective bargaining, freedom of association, and I'm very pleased that these are also appearing as indicators in the proposal. I think this is very important for many of the objectives. I think we have the last speaker, Binod Kadria, for this session. Binod, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Irem. Thank you. Well, I am from GRFDT, and since time is short, I would just like to begin by congratulating Claire for summarizing, such an extensive work that has been done over the months, and I had the privilege of attending some of them. Talking of indicators, I think all the 23 objectives are important, some more, some less, but I would draw inspiration from what Alan said about the 23rd objective, which was not there right in the beginning. So that, I think, is evoking procedural or institutional memory of the making of the GCM that we have to keep in mind. And I think when it comes to identifying the indicators and then moving on to operationalization, that's where I think the objective 23rd objective on, and to use Alan's word, friendship, global friendship between countries is going to be extremely important. That's where what comes to my mind is the disappointment of the GCM members in terms of the absence of its binding nature, accountability of the countries. And one can understand why that is so. That comes from the sense of sovereignty and so on. But I think there are other ways of bringing in some kind of like self-discipline, self-accountability. And that I think is an extremely important at this point in time, because we have seen that through the period of the making of the GCM, we have seen the world getting more and more divided in terms because of aggression, you name it, Ukraine or the Gaza-Israeli conflict, or we are now facing, large number of countries are facing elections, general elections, and new governments are going to come in place. And that's where I think we probably should be in a position to appeal to the new governments that accountability, self-accountability is going to be very important. And that's where I think equitable adversary analysis probably would be the right way of implementing the objectives of the GCM by identifying the indicators. That's where I think it is important that we make it a point that the role of the judiciary is going to be important. We have taken into account the executives, the member states, but the arm of judiciary is extremely important in terms of moving from, say, upholding of the human rights to the demand for fundamental rights. That I think is important, because many and most of the countries do have their constitutions which guarantee fundamental rights to citizens as well as migrants. And I think it is time that we put that in our proceedings. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Binod, for the contributions, and thanks to everyone for their very rich contributions. These are all taking note of. I see also in the chat there are inputs, for example, from Melanie from UNICEF, but some of the things that were mentioned are also included in the proposal as additional indicators. These are the projected ones are only the core indicators, but of course still any gaps would be reflected upon. And just to also say, I believe it was Fabian who mentioned to the need to the request to send written inputs, and I see colleagues from the network have shared email addresses in the chat, so you can all use that. If you were not able to share here orally, you can send your contributions by email. With that, again, thank you all for the rich contributions. I will now hand over the meeting to Ms. Natalia Novakova, Europe Regional Manager at the International Detention Coalition, to moderate the next cluster of objectives, the discussion around that. Thank you.
Can I just come in quickly beforehand, Irem, with very boring to be the unpopular person? We have half an hour to discuss 3 clusters. So I would really urge that we move through them as quickly as possible so that each can at least achieve be the subject of some discussion, noting that the email addresses are in the chat section as well. Sorry to put the skates on, colleagues. Over to Natalia.
Thank you, and then I will try to be brief. So I'm representing the International Detention Coalition. I'm sure many of you know the organization. I'm Europe Regional Manager, and as the name suggests, the objective 13 alternatives to detention are the most dear for us. We are a global movement of nearly 400 civil society organizations which are active in 75 countries around the globe, advocating for alternatives to detention, among other things. And we are within UN Network on Migration. We are co-chairing respective group alternatives to detention. But within this work stream, we have been really actively participating and discussing within this forum. Well, obviously, the objectives we are talking about in these clusters are very important, and it's no wonder that they attracted really heated and serious discussion. And I think that wouldn't be exaggeration to say that the co-leaders made fantastic job with putting everyone together and leading us through the process and making sure that we are together in it. And I guess the result of such work is never perfect, but since we are working on it and we are on this road, then together we might carry on improving it. So without further ado, and in the spirit of really trying to save time, I would pass to Claire Healy, coordinator of UNODC Observatory on Smuggling Smuggling and Migration, UN Office of Drugs and Crime. She will set us on our discussion, and then we will open the floor for the questions. Please, Claire.
Thank you very much, Natalia. I hope you all hear me well. I had prepared definitely a bit too much for this, so I will go extremely quickly through the slides to get to the main point, right? So in this cluster, we are looking at the objectives number 4 on legal identity and documentation, objective number 8 on saving lives, number 9 on counter smuggling, number 10 on eradicating trafficking, number 11 on managing borders, 13 on alternatives to detention. Sorry, interpreters, I'll slow down. And number 21 on dignified return and reintegration. So I work at the UNODC in our research and data collection team. We cover specifically trafficking in persons of smuggling of migrants. So I don't want to talk on things that I don't have expertise on, but just to say that when we look at some of the other objectives covered in this cluster, they're also extremely relevant to smuggling of migrants and trafficking in persons. We find in our research legal identity and documentation. So the fact of people not having specific legal identity documentation status is a key root cause of people using smugglers and of being trafficked. So I think there's a very important link and crossover there. Equally, in terms of saving lives in the migration context, we look at that from the perspective of dangerous smuggling journeys, in some cases aggravated smuggling offences committed by smugglers, putting people's lives at risk. When it comes to objective 11, also on managing borders, that's something we look at very carefully. In both how smuggled migrants and refugees are treated at borders, linking also to the objective on alternatives to detention, as well as looking at the law enforcement response to identify smugglers. So having said that, if you'll allow me to just zoom in specifically on migrant smuggling data collection, because I think this might help a little bit for the discussion on the relevant indicators. In our work at the Observatory on Smuggling of Migrants, we see a number of challenges in migrant smuggling data collection. One key challenge is the way in which the smuggling of migrants protocol, the international legislation, is domesticated. In many countries still, it hasn't been domesticated at all, and so smuggling is not an offence. In other countries where it is domesticated in the national law, it's not in line with the smuggling protocol. So briefly, the smuggling offence, according to international legislation, comprises the facilitation of an irregular entry for a financial or material benefit. In many countries, for example, in Europe, where I'm based, the financial or material benefit is not a required element. And so cases of facilitation of irregular migration that don't constitute smuggling, according to the international law, are considered as such, making it in summary, extremely challenging to identify which cases are smuggling and which cases are not. To a large extent, in many countries, instead of measuring smuggling of migrants, countries and regions measure irregular migration. They measure the interactions between irregular migrants and people seeking international protection with the authorities and on migration routes, and they don't focus on countering smuggling specifically. And a third key challenge is that the legislation is sort of set out and the policies are set out to look at the smuggling of migrants, whereas we would see in most regions in the world, at least half of people using smugglers are actually in a refugee situation. And so it begs the question as to whether we should treat it differently in that case. So when we look at the indicators, the core indicator 1 on formal strategies to address migrant smuggling, some comments we would have on that. I mean, we very much welcome the clear distinction now made between smuggling of migrants and trafficking in persons in terms of these indicators. But we think it's important to look at that issue of whether or not smuggling is actually criminalized in the law. So not just strategies, but also legislation and policies. Then we consider it extremely important to consider not only the government's policies and responses to this, which I think the 2 core indicators and the 2 additional indicators are all pretty much based on sort of a government's framework to respond to smuggling. We actually have existing data collection at UNODC that goes beyond that and goes to actually measuring the phenomenon itself and the extent to which states are responding from a criminal justice point of view. So we do collect data on that, but it's extremely poor in terms of actually using it on the prosecution and conviction and arrest and so on of offenders, because that's what seems to be missing here. Also, for Objective 10 on trafficking in persons, what we still see missing is a focus on the actual perpetrators. Then, in terms of smuggled migrants and refugees, we would suggest an additional indicator looking at whether prevention measures include responses to root causes, because a lot of the research we look at is on the drivers of smuggling. So why does this take place? We see a clear link, and again, this also applies to Objective 10 on trafficking in persons. We see a clear link with corruption. Therefore, in order to address these 2 particular phenomena related to migration of smuggling in migrants and trafficking in persons, it's essential from our perspective to address corruption and how that not only facilitates smuggling and trafficking, but actually leads people to seek out smugglers because of having to deal with corruption during their migration journeys. Then what's also important is, as a suggested additional indicator, is whether measures are in place to address aggravated forms of migrant smuggling. So situations where not only are people smuggled, but they're subject to certain abuses and violations, including trafficking in persons. So it would be good to look at whether there are measures in place to address this and ensure access to justice and to assistance. And finally, then financial aspects of smuggling, so the kind of fees that are changing hands, linked, of course, to the broader issue within the Sustainable Development Goals of illicit financial flows. So yeah, it's just a call in general to look a bit more at the criminal side of that. I mentioned corruption and abuses. When it comes to trafficking in persons in the context of international migration, we would still stress that it's important. While there is an additional indicator that breaks down sort of the percentage of trafficking in persons victims who are migrants, we, in our data collection for the Global Report on Trafficking in Persons, we see many domestic cases of trafficking that may not be in any way linked to migration. And so it seems a bit too broad, the indicator in its current form, even with the additional indicator on the percentage who are migrants. This is an indicator that we collect under the SDG 16 anyway. So it's quite easy for us to provide that data, but we encourage that it would be broken down, disaggregated according to whether the victims are foreign, in the country where they're identified or not. Then similarly to smuggling, we would suggest looking at the criminal justice data, the number of traffickers identified and prosecuted by sex, age, and their role in the trafficking network, which again is data we can already provide through the Global Report on Trafficking in Persons, which is an annual data collection, collecting that information, and then released every 2 years, but based on an available database that we can provide at UNODC. And finally, the data on the protection of victims of trafficking. So that's a key element of assessing a state's response in preventing, combating trafficking is, are they providing sufficient protection in all the different forms to identified victims of trafficking? So that's it. Looking forward to hearing back from you. I hope it wasn't too fast for the translators, but I was trying to keep it short.
Thank you, Claire. That's an excellent overview of the work and the background. Well, we are open for the questions now. I don't see yet any raised hands. Yes, here we go. Melanie, I see you're from UNICEF. Well, please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm from UNICEF, but I'm also speaking here on behalf of the UN Migration Network Alternative to Detention work stream, which of course IDC is another co-lead of. Just wanted to say on behalf of that ATD work stream, we are very grateful for the changes that have been made to the indicators for Objective 13. I'm just speaking on Objective 13. One important point for us is that the second core indicator is about adults and the additional indicators are about children. And ideally, we'd want those additional indicators to be made core, those about children, although we do understand the limitations and difficulties that there are. But the key thing is to retain the indicators that are currently there in Objective 13. We are aware that there are states that are saying that they only want to include in this points that are in the chapeau of GCM Objective 13, and that therefore there are questions about including indicators about child immigration detention. We think it's absolutely essential that indicators about child immigration detention are retained, and we would argue that the list of actions in the GCM is really the only way to operationalize and measure the chapeau. And so it's really important that that is retained. And of course, they're all voluntary for states at the end of the day. Thank you. We just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. That's excellent contribution. And thank you for helping it out because I was hesitant if I should bring this topic in. Well, Fabian, I will not risk mispronouncing your surname, so you go and please indicate your organization.
Yes, thank you, Fabian, which is the Lutheran World Federation. And thank you for giving us the possibility to send written contributions. So I'm going to be brief, but I'm going to take advantage of this second intervention to say thank you for presenting the proposals of the indicators and for the hard work you have done on this. So for the cluster 2, we are missing some indicators on individuals providing humanitarian assistance, and particularly on Objectives 8, Save Lives, Objective 9, Smuggling, and Objective 10, Trafficking in Persons. They refer to avoiding criminalization of migrants, but we think it's important also to avoid criminalization of individuals or organizations providing humanitarian assistance to them. So I will send the written contributions. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent and very important topic. The emails have been provided during the previous cluster discussion in the chat, so please use them. Greg, you are the next one. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, hi, thank you. I'm Greg from APINDO, the Indonesian Police Association. Claire, a really good, very thorough and detailed explanation just now. I would just like to add 2 things. One is in the form of a question. which is, would it be a good idea that for some statistics, I know you mentioned corruption is important to track. I'm aware that there is already an international indicator for perceived corruption among many stakeholders in the business world. It's ranked annually, and there are many countries that are surveyed. I wonder if it would be a good idea that instead of recreating the wheel, so to speak, we can use available data and statistics already collected by other organizations that are considered reputable in giving this overall picture of corruption between destination countries and sending countries as well. That's point number one. The second one I would like to also ask actually is, I've seen in one of our forums discussions on how to track migration, right? Statistically, that is sound and not just a correlated or estimated figure. My colleagues in the airlines industry, they sometimes like to share statistics that are widely available of countries basically publishing how many visitors they receive in any given year, right? Some countries are very happy and ecstatic when they have tons of visitors, millions or tens of millions of visitors in a year. And our colleagues in the airline industry would sometimes insinuate that for certain countries, perhaps they're not all tourists. They're not all not business people. There are many people who come with tourist visas, but then they overstay their visa so that they can work in that country, or use it as a transit country for another destination. So I thought, that's really interesting. It's quite possible, right? Because all the countries track and publish how many incoming visitors come in. But so far, to my knowledge, I've never seen countries that also track the net, the number of visitors that then leave within the given period allowable to stay in a country for that particular visa. So meaning if, let's say, Indonesia or Malaysia or Singapore, they have 20 million visitors in a year, how many of those visitors actually leave after 6 months, which is the maximum allowable time for tourists, right? If there's still 20 million who didn't leave after 6 months and they don't have any working permits, then can we consider them illegal migrants or, refugees or whatnot? So I wonder if that statistic is already available and whether you are collecting it and whether that can be used for helping us in terms of tracking all these indicators. Thank you.
Well, I think overall intention is to use the statistics where is available. I think, unfortunately, because of the time limits, I won't be able to hand it back to Claire for more explanations. I hope you will take it offline if necessary. But generally, yes, there is an intention of use. As much of data is already available. I will hand to Filipa, who has his hand raised, and that will be the last intervention in this cluster. Please, Filipa, go ahead and introduce yourself. We don't hear you, but we see you. No. Well, if technology doesn't work...
il s'agit de moi qui...
Yes, excellent.
Bonsoir à tout le monde. Alors,
Good evening, everyone. I'm based in Cameroon. I wanted to take the floor regarding Objective 11. I would suggest that we have an indicator. No more audio, unfortunately.
I guess that's a technical problem. So I hope that Filipa will come back and will post his comment in the chat. Then at this moment, I will then wrap up the discussion of this cluster and transfer to the cluster 3 to Mr. Rifat Hussain, Lead Data and Evidence, Department of Health and Migration, World Health Organization, who will moderate the next cluster.
Sorry, thank you very much, Natalia. Thanks, organizers, colleagues, Marcia, Claire, and Mr. Prentice. So because of the lack of time, I will not say much. I will just make a very quick introduction. I just wanted to reflect on the amazing work that was done by this work stream, just to compare with data group that the UN Network of Migration had when I joined this migration health program in the WHO. I was part of that group, and it was sunset around the beginning of the COVID time. And the amazing work that this work stream has done goes without saying. So I will not say much more. I will hand over very quickly to Patty and Michelle to make the short presentation. So can you please make your presentation as short as possible so that we can allow for some discussions? Because Jonathan said that half an hour ago that we have half an hour for 3, and we have one more to go plus this one.
I misspoke. I think we're going into 5 o'clock.
Until 5. Okay, so we have a little bit of time. Thanks, Jonathan.
Apologies.
So in any case, over to you, Patty.
Thank you so much, Rifat. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Super. In the interest of time, just to say once again, thank you to all the stakeholders who've joined us here today. I think it's actually much more important that we would hear from them with regard to these objectives, and also just maybe to say that, you know, from the side of the Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism, you know, we have been advocating for a robust monitoring framework, and that's what I think is important in terms of us measuring progress of the GCM and giving, you know, life and breadth to the indicators, just paraphrasing what Jonathan had shared from the very beginning. So maybe moving really straight into, you know, even just to have the screen on, obviously on these core indicators, in a way, having, you know, we work a lot on diaspora and understanding migration governance. And so, you know, when you look at the cracks of these indicators that are here in this particular panel, for us, there's a lot of interconnections, but indeed also a lot of interconnections as others have alluded to in other spaces as well. But what is very critical and very important, I think, to understand when we look, for instance, at objective 14 and 15, both from the side of the core indicators, but the additional indicators, is really to determine in how the indicators have been phrased about you know, the relationship between what government is doing in terms of consular protection, but also how that links on to other stakeholders. And I think we can say the same for objective 15 as well, where I think it is very much felt, and I think this has already been raised as a question: how do we sort of see issues that are related to health, education, but also in the additional indicators, it's very clear to see how other additional services are also taken care of, or have to be taken care of in the context of migrants and supporting migrants and their families. Moving on to 16, I think for us, we felt that there was a lot of discussions, obviously, on what, you know, full inclusion would obviously mean, and social inclusion from that perspective. And so these core indicators that are fitting in this particular space, for us, in a way, try to, you know, to give a sense. But then, of course, as we had heard even from other deliberations before, the fact that we have a lot of the core indicators, for instance, asking a whether or not question raises an issue. But as has been explained by the co-chairs, that these indicators are really drawn from frameworks. And so their formulation and the text itself is really borrowing from these framework indicators. And in a way, I think it will be important as we move forward to understand that we also don't borrow from the inconsistencies that we have found in the frameworks that we're leaning these indicators on. But that said, we find that the additional indicators, for instance, help us to look at, you know, issues that are related to informal employment and how that plays a critical role, but also looking at compliance with labor rights, something that has also been mentioned in this space. The very last, I think, looking at 19 and 20, what has really been interesting, I think, for us as we have tried to unpack these, and I think I would also say many thanks to the co-chairs of the work stream on remittances and diasporas, also a work stream that GRFDT is active on, together with other civil society organizations, or rather non-state actors in that particular space, is to sort of look a little bit more widely what these conditions for migrants and diasporas would look like in terms of the indicators. So we were really trying to ensure that we're broadening the scope, particularly when you look also at the additional indicators, you know, really trying to unpack issues around multiple citizenship that is still very important in terms of the contributions that we want to see in a lot of countries, in a lot of homelands for diaspora, but also really looking at this interconnection with the recognition of skills and qualifications that have been acquired abroad. To what extent are we seeing host governments taking this on, but also going all the way to how countries of origin are organizing and engaging more effectively and strategically with the diversity of migrants and diaspora that they have living abroad. And this obviously has a very close relation to the remittances. That's on Objective 20, the core indicators as well, that not look just at remittances as a proportion of the amounts that's remitted, but we're also really interested to look at financial inclusion, which, as the discussion is in the remittances space, is really a twin objective is really an essential part of Objective 20, even though a lot of times the emphasis seems to be sitting on the remittances. And of course, the very last one is looking at portability of social security benefits and really trying to understand not just the provision from the government, from the host government where migrants are living, but also looking a bit at the responsibility that is coming from countries of origin. And with this, I think what's really important for us, as I said, was to hear from the diversity of actors that we have here. Thank you for taking time, and back to you, Rifat.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Patty. That was Patty, Vice President, Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism. I'm really sorry, Patty, I did not introduce you earlier. Over to Michelle Lavoie, Director of Platform for International Cooperation on Undocumented Migrants.
Thank you, Rifat. Yes, thank you very much. And thank you very much also to Claire Minozzi and the whole team for putting this together. Echoing what the others have said, it's very extensive. And so I'd like to just give some brief feedback on how we think what we're seeing now with the proposal could help us further find out more about the situation of undocumented migrants. I wanted to highlight Objective 15 and 16 and then two other ones very briefly. The first one is Objective 15, the core indicator 1, where it says whether or not the government provides non-nationals equal access to essential and or emergency healthcare. The first question that I want to ask is, what do we mean by non-nationals? So I imagine that this is probably based on a lot of statistical information. I guess the one kind of caveat would be, how do we see a situation like EU countries where indeed they might have statistics on non-nationals, but they might be EU citizens, which might have a different status than third country nationals. So I suppose I ask about non-nationals because it comes up both in 15, I think it comes up in 7 and maybe in another one. But I imagine that it's probably from the statistical side of view. I mean, would it be possible to say whether or not the government provides migrants, regardless of status, equal access, etc.? We know that governments are very hesitant about highlighting too much what they're doing concerning migrants, regardless of status. I just recall at the UNICEF regional review for the Global Compact earlier this month that Norway took the floor on behalf of a couple of other governments, almost 5 or 6 other ones. And Norway said, we reiterate the importance of the principle that states have the authority to distinguish between regular and irregular. And we maintain our distinction between these different groups, meaning that they, as we heard in 2018 in the discussion of the Global Compact, want to make sure that there is this distinction. However, the Compact reiterates the rights of undocumented migrants. And so I think it's really useful to see how we can make sure that migrants, regardless of status, is really counted for in this particular indicator. I also had a question because, in a sense, it's asking two things. Do they provide access to essential care or emergency healthcare, which are actually quite different because essential can be quite broad. And I was also wondering, what will it look like in the end when the whole activity is finished and the indicators are approved and governments start counting? Will we be able to find, for example, either on UNDESA's website or somewhere, information when it is collected. So, for example, as PICUM, we'd be interested to know how many countries in the world provide undocumented migrants access to essential care. How many of them provide access to emergency care? They're actually two different things. So some follow-up there. And also in terms of that particular objective, it seems like it could be an additional indicator to ask if there are firewalls. So are there policies prohibiting data sharing of personal information of migrants, regardless of status, when they access healthcare, as an example? On Objective 16, it's really good to see the additional indicator number 6 on labor. And I was wondering, and here I mentioned this because migration status is mentioned. It actually says migrant, but I think it probably is a typo. I was wondering if the information that we're going to get here could help us have more data on, for example, how many complaints are filed by undocumented workers about their labor conditions to authorities. How many back wages have been paid to undocumented workers? If there is legislation in place, how many residence permits have been issued in cases of severe labor exploitation? So it was just to kind of know what's maybe behind this general indicator. And the additional indicator 5 in Objective 16, it's very good also to see migration status here concerning occupational injuries, fatal and non-fatal. I was wondering also behind this one, would we have more information about what happens, for example, when an undocumented worker is injured and needs health care? I mean, that's linked to Objective 15. But what about disability? Would they have access to disability allowances if they are injured? Perhaps in Objective 22 on non-nationals and Social Security, this might cover it. But another question is, would their family have access to compensation in case of death? So another question. Number 7 in Objective 16 brings in housing. Is it useful would we find out, for example, if landlords or landladies are required to inform authorities if they rent to an undocumented migrant? Is housing potentially penalized under the anti-smuggling legislation? More on the smuggling one shortly. And then on number 10 in the same one, it talks about the proportion of people who are feeling discriminated because of a certain ground of discrimination prohibited under international human rights law. Is it possible to add a potential ground of discrimination and other status? So meaning that it's our impression that most likely resident status is not a formal ground of discrimination in the laws themselves. It's in the interpretation of many of the committees, but it's just to bring in that point. And then finally, on number, it might be also useful to add in Objective 16 a reference to the annual number of regularizations. That's in Objective 7, but it could also be added here. And then just briefly on Objective 7 on vulnerabilities. Here it refers to equal access to justice, but once again, the non-nationals language is called in again, so the same kind of considerations. And also an Objective 7 under additional indicator number 3, it refers to children on the move. We would suggest to drop this terminology and refer to migrant children. There are children, and here it talks about the best interests procedure. There are children who are born in a country who have never moved anywhere, but are still considered migrant or undocumented children. So just to avoid this on the move terminology. And then the last brief point on Objective 9. So following also what Claire Healy from UNODC gave as all the indications on smuggling, and also Fabian Wildes on the Lutheran World Federation. Is it possible to add in some indicators on how many people are criminalized due to the anti-smuggling legislation? So, for example, how many people are criminalized for acts of solidarity with migrants, and how many people are criminalized for crossing borders irregularly? We've just seen in our own research in PICUM in 2023, only on media monitoring, that there's at least 117 people who have been criminalized for acts of solidarity and 76 people criminalized for crossing borders irregularly. So just some additional considerations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Very comprehensive observations. I guess we cannot open for answers from Claire, Marcia, or anyone. But I would like to make one comment because you spoke about health, your first one, that was the indicator WHO proposed. And in fact, this is something Claire and Marcia, I was going to write to you because we just sent exactly Michelle's point. Instead of non-nationals, we just sent to our member states for the World Health Assembly deliberations, the indicator, non-nationals within bracket, including refugees and migrants. And we said that we are working with the interagency expert group on SDG indicators in the comprehensive review process to refine that indicator. And also, I think, Marcia, you asked a question a few weeks ago, because that objective 15 is about access to services, but that is not about access to services, more about government policies towards. So we proposed another indicator, which is instead of does the government provide equal access, and instead that's an additional indicator is proportion of refugees and migrants that have access. So anyways, I can write that to you separately, and happy to copy you, Michelle, if you like. Open for comments, questions. The floor is open. Thank you. Oh, it's so clear that there is no question, so maybe we can actually move on fast. I'm sure. Oh, there is from Raj. I don't know, Raj, if you kindly introduce yourself, where you're from, then Greg Chen from Apindo. Raj? Raj, you are muted. If you kindly unmute.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, hi, my name is Raj Badvil, and I'm Vice President of the Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism, Paddy's colleague. I'm very impressed, like others have said, that finally the indicators have come to the stage, which are not only impressive, but hopefully are also doable or can be used or usable. My concern is that, after having worked in the UN myself for many years in the past, not anymore now, that, these progress reports, they are presented and often they are reported and we are not so sure the extent to which there are biases. So how can we safeguard that? Is there anything to know that the report will be presented or these are not binding? Okay, firstly, they're not binding. Surveys will be sent. Yeah, there will be reports. They're not binding. Then there will be an SDGs report and so on and so forth. How, in fact, do we see or can we see this as a practical contribution in terms of knowing the reality on the ground? And here I have a very humble suggestion, not regarding the indicators, that the countries, that there should be somewhere that there is a working group, that the countries set up some kind of independent working group that can do a sort of, to see what is happening in terms of reporting, analysis, and feedback and so on. I don't know if it's possible to do that. So that's my concern. It's good to have all of these things, and they're very impressive. To what extent do we see it is going to improve the situation? Because firstly, as I said, the compact is not binding. And since it's not binding, the reporting is not binding too, right? So they can use, so there's a lot of work that has gone in, a lot of goodwill, sincere work that has gone in. I only hope we get the good results out of that. Thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the floor.
Thank you very much, Raj. So we have, I can tell you lots of stories about that, but we take it offline. Greg Chen next from Apindo, and I think I don't see any other hands up, so I will close after Greg. Greg, I don't see you anymore.
Yeah. Hello. Thank you for the time. Just to add to the points earlier shared, there's a lot of terminologies used, but I do agree with the previous speaker before Raj just now that basically all workers, I just compare this to us as visitors when we visit a country as a tourist or as a business for business reasons. We're always asked to get health insurance, right? In case we're sick in the country that we are visiting, especially in a developed country. So some way to pay for basic health needs, going to the doctor, visiting the doctor, going to the hospital, that needs to be addressed if someone's going to be working full time for some extended period, whatever you want to call it. Secondly, people can get into accidents, right? Workers can always get into the accident. So some sort of accident insurance, who will pay for the accident, especially if they're working in agriculture and construction and in the kind of jobs that many of the local population does not want to engage in. It's a lot of high risk jobs. So some sort of accident protection needs to be there. And last but not least, what was also addressed is death, right? If someone dies, who will pay for their funeral? Who will pay for sending the body back home, right, to their families, right? That's often not addressed enough. And I've always felt that when I attend these forums and we talk about these things, you know, I compare all this to myself, right? When I visit a country, especially a developed country in Western EU or the United States or Canada, Australia or Japan, they will always ask you for proof of insurance, right? Before they will grant you your visa. You must have health insurance. So in case you're sick, you can pay for it. And many times that insurance package will include if you get into the accident there, and in some instances even some sort of life insurance to pay for the cost of sending your body back home in case you die at the destination country. So these three basic things needs to be in place, whatever term you want to use it, whether it's social security or decent work, but it must be in place as a mandatory minimum requirement for any destination country to begin to receive migrant workers for any extended period of time. I hope that internationally we all can come to an agreement on those basic standards, because we can all agree that we don't want our workers to suddenly go sick and no one knows how to pay for them. No one knows how they can access help. And guess what? If they bring a communicable disease, they can spread it to everybody else, right? So, as we've witnessed through COVID recently. So, hopefully, just to add to this discussion, those three basic things, whatever terms you want to call it, should be very explicit. It should be very clear. And I think it should be a minimum mandatory requirement for a destination country to become a destination country for migrant workers. That would be my add to this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg. I'm sure the Secretariat is taking copious notes to consider your points. Just a quick comment about, I mean, there's a problem with the limited set or indicators period. I mean, I guess a lot of things you want to see, I'm sure everybody will agree, you as well, that they will come in the narrative when you collect the data and write stories behind the data. Anyways, we don't have time, so I hope there is plenty of time for the next cluster. So over to Jenna Hennebrey, Associate Dean at the Wilfrid Laurier University, Canada, and the founder of the Gender Migration Hub. Jenna, over to you for panel 4.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Wow, what a stimulating conversation so far. And of course, we're running out of time like always, but I'm pleased to be here and thank you very much for the opportunity. So, you know, when having a look at this, so for this session, we're going to talk about Objective 1, collect and utilize accurate and disaggregated data as a basis for evidence-based policies. Objective 3, And Objective 23, strengthen international cooperation and global partnerships for safe, orderly, and regular migration. So I would argue these are not clustered together here by accident. They are in fact interrelated, and you cannot address and reduce vulnerabilities and eliminate discrimination without gathering and utilizing disaggregated data and having accurate information to inform all policies and international cooperation. So indeed, I think that's why Objective 1 comes first, actually, in all of our objectives around the compact, because it really is key in order to ensure the realization of all other objectives, and in particular to realize, Objective 3, providing accurate and timely information. So I'm a professor, I'm an active researcher, I'm trained in demography and statistics, and I'm the founder of the Gender Plus Migration Hub. So I know how much work went into this, and really want to extend kudos to Claire and Marcia and all the members of the workstream for this work. I also know that how we measure what we intend to measure really matters, right? So indicators are meant to indicate concepts, to measure them, right? To reflect reality. And so we're thinking about measuring progress on the objectives, right? Which is why it matters so much that we're building on existing indicators, such as the SDGs. It's also really important to be thinking about that the indicators need to be generalizable and representative of the population and the realities of migration for all migrants, right? So this is why it's so vital to ensure disaggregated data being used as well, in order to reflect all of the different and differential experiences of migration for people with different identity factors, gender, race, disability. All of these things come together to create very different experiences of migration for different people, and we need to respond to that differently. So it's well known that we have to respond differently to the different experiences of migration, and that we want to signal that recognizing those and collecting data that reflects that difference really matters, because we recognize how vital it is to gather data and have that information and evidence inform our policy. So to guide our discussion here today, I'll start off with just one reminder, which is that what gets measured gets seen, what gets measured gets done, and what gets measured actually matters. So let's ensure data and indicators aim to leave no one out of our measurement, and we don't want to risk leaving anyone behind. I want to turn the floor now to my colleague and fabulous individual from the Women in Migration Network, Paula Sement, who will kick us off in discussion for this cluster. You've got the floor now, Paula.
Thank you, Gina, and thanks a lot also for this opportunity of reviewing and having this consultation at this final rounds on indicators of the GCM. And I will focus my intervention on gender indicators that has been achieved after the different rounds of consultation and what we can improve also. So what we have achieved and what we can improve, taking into consideration that gender responsiveness is one of the guiding principles of the GCM, and this was one of the criteria for including indicators. My first point is that all indicators should be disaggregated by sex, though sex disaggregation is not enough. There should be standalone gender equality indicators as core indicators. And on this issue, I have some recommendations, and one is that we propose to use SDG indicator 5.1.1 on legal frameworks in place to promote, enforce, and monitor equality and non-discrimination on the basis of sex as core indicator for objectives 7 and 17. And also, we know that indicator 5.1.1, which I just mentioned, is already part of objective 7 as an additional indicator, though this is not enough because it ties women with vulnerability. Another core indicator that we think should be included, or indicator that should be included as core indicator, is for objective 16, the inclusion and social cohesion should incorporate gender indicator 5.1 on public allocations for gender equality and women's empowerment. We also consider that core indicators that should be kept in the next proposal that are already there as core indicators is for objective 1, whether or not the government has a mechanism to ensure that migration policy is informed by data appropriately disaggregated, including disaggregation by sex. And on objective 7, access to justice, and as also a core indicator. And we think that this could be a dimension that should be included is access to justice for survivors of gender-based violence. On gender-based violence, we think it is not enough to place SDG indicator 5.2.2 on violence against women and girls in objectives 10 to eradicate trafficking. This additional indicator should also be included in objective 7 on vulnerabilities and objective 2 on adverse drivers. Another thing that we welcome is a new indicator on objective 3, whether or not country provides newly arrived migrants with targeted gender-responsive information and legal guidance on their rights and obligations. And in objective 15 on accessible services points at the local level that are migrant inclusive, offer relevant information on basic services in a gender and disability responsive as well as a child sensitive manner and to which safe access is facilitated. And I think this one is very important because what we welcome is the intersectionality approach of this indicator. And we think this should be used in other indicators as well. We agree that this was a limited set of indicators and that there were several frameworks that were included, but we think that we should have also human rights instruments as source of indicators. We know that a new achievement that was that the information on ratification of human rights treaties, but we think that also we should use as tools the indicators that are provided by these human rights treaties. For example, those on women's rights emerging from CEDAW and labor rights emerging from ILO Convention 190 on violence and harassment in the world of work. So I can give you some examples of how we can use these human rights-based indicators. Under Objective 7, we propose the following indicators on violence against women. There are CEDAW general recommendations, for example, General Recommendation 19, that it identifies gender-based violence as a form of discrimination against women. General Recommendation 35, whether or not legislation and policies on violence against women and access to justice for victims of violence are in place. And under Objective 6, we propose the following indicators. Article 7 of ILO 190, whether or not laws and regulations are in place to define and prohibit violence and harassment in the world of work, including gender-based violence and harassment. Under Objectives 7 and 10, we propose the following indicators on access to justice for all migrants, including women and girls. For example, yes.
Sorry, I'm very sorry to interrupt. We've just received some information and I wanted to share it with everyone because we're running out of time. And
Yes.
And what we've learned is the interpreters have agreed to be able to extend the meeting, but only as far as about 10 after 5. So we have to move faster. I hate how these things go, that the people at the end have to go and be more more concise. But I think you have such an amazing detail here. Wondered if you could maybe share some of that detail in the chat or in written.
I have already sent
these are really important points, and I don't want to undermine them. So if you could maybe highlight a key point and then share those other things, those more detailed recommendations in a written submission, and then we can hear from our last speaker as well. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no problem. I will wrap up. I have already sent my intervention to the work stream, so they can have all this detailed information in written. And I also wanted to mention, Gina, that this is a collaboration, and your key role. All this proposal was made in collaboration with you and with the Gender Plus Migration Hub. And I think it's key that the workstream is including this gender equality indicators as part of this limited set of indicators. And back to you.
Thank you so much, Paula, for that. I think there's been so much collaboration across all the work streams, and in our work stream, the gender work stream, and then the indicators work stream that we participated in, there's been incredible collaboration all the way across. And so that's why I think the indicators are so strong, right? So I'm going to turn the floor to our second panelist, Mr. Christian Wolf, Program Manager, Migration and Displacement Act Alliance. Go ahead, Christian, you have the floor. Please keep your comments as brief as possible so we have time to do a little wrap up at the end. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Jenna, and thanks also to Paula. And sorry I have to barge into your presentation, but we lost a lot of time earlier. So just very briefly, wanted to acknowledge the hard work that's gone into developing this draft already, as others have done. It really has been quite an extensive process. And we also recognize, of course, the limitations under which this endeavor has had to operate. That being said, I would be remiss not to use my time to point out a few areas of potential improvement in the interest of tracking actual progress in implementing the GCM. And progress in this sense would mean not just tracking whether certain things have been done, but crucially also how they've been done and whether the measures that have been taken have in fact resulted in measurable improvements in the lives of migrants. So on the overall framework, we note that many of the indicators, in particular core indicators, are crafted in a binary manner, asking states to respond whether or not they have adopted certain policies. This would then tell us, for example, whether country X has adopted a migration policy. It would not tell us whether this policy was actually good, what's the status of implementation, or if it has improved the human rights situation of migrants in the country. Some of these issues are then partly addressed in the additional indicators, although we worry that their status as additional will negatively impact their adoption and use by member states, which in turn would significantly limit their potential to track progress and be able to draw comparisons, both over time and between countries and regions. On the importance of disaggregating data, we agree with others, such as PICOM earlier and the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights, that wherever possible, data should be disaggregated not just by sex and age, but also by migration status, due to the importance of tracking discrimination that is often linked to this variable. In this context, it's important, though, to emphasize that the gathering of such data must not be used to promote immigration and enforcement. Now, on the specific indicators covered in this cluster, let me just use Objective 7 as an example to discuss the significance of the limitations of the overall framework that I alluded to earlier. So prioritizing the SDG indicator framework as a frame of reference in this case seems to have led to the omission of the most significant aspect of addressing and reducing vulnerabilities in migration, which is mentioned in Objective 7, paragraph A, namely a review of relevant policies and practices to ensure that they do not create, exacerbate, or unintentionally increase vulnerabilities of migrants. The current draft does not ask states whether they have carried out such reviews, not even in the additional indicators. The suggested core indicator does ask, for instance, whether or not the government provides non-nationals equal access to justice. And I agree with the points made about the definition of non-nationals earlier, so no need to reiterate that here. So, and this is then further defined as including legal advice, assistance, representation for persons detained or charged with criminal offenses, access to legal information, and so forth. I'm summarizing. What it does not do is ask whether such access was actually available to migrants or whether the scale at which it was offered was commensurate with the needs of migrants. Another example, some other indicators appear to be somewhat needlessly specific and therefore restrictive. For example, Additional indicator 6 requests information on the, quote, number of people who died or disappeared in the process of migration towards an international destination. Now, end quote. Would this mean that, for example, migrants who die on a boat that has already left international waters and thereby technically reached its international destination don't get counted? What about migrants who die in a truck? Do they get counted if they die in France but not in the UK, if that was their final intended destination? And what about migrants who die in detention facilities where they are technically no longer in the process of migration? So perhaps it would just be better to simply refer to deaths and disappearances occurring in the context of migration here to be more inclusive. Now, these examples illustrate not only the need to clarify the final text, but also to focus on the issue of follow-up and implementation. It's not clear at the moment how this indicator framework would be used by states, assuming that there would be agreement during the next IMRF on this in the first place. It would seem important to establish a baseline for many of the data points being suggested here, so that future assessments can measure progress. In order to ensure comparability, it would further be necessary to encourage states to synchronize the timing and frequency of their measurements. None of this is currently addressed in the draft. In addition, it's likely that further guidance and accompaniment of the network for member states would be needed to help implement this framework. The question arises how best to do this. One suggestion could be to include this topic in the ongoing work of the workstream on supporting member states in the implementation of the GCM. However, as we've commented previously on many occasions, and this would be particularly important here, it would be crucial to ensure that member states from all regions, not just developing countries, are included in relevant trainings and conversations so that the same standards for reporting are promoted throughout the international community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christian. I think it's a good point to leave it there and pass it on to the co-leads who have done such amazing work and can further fill us in on next steps. So Claire, Irene, well done, and I'll pass it off to you. Thank you both.
Thank you so much, Jenna. Irene is, I think, in the room, and I wanted to see if she wanted to take the floor, but I can also share a few ideas. And thank you, first of all, to all the speakers, the moderators, and all colleagues who have agreed to share their views and have taken the floor. This has been extremely rich and detailed, and we look forward to your written comments also. I think there are a few key kind of connecting elements that kind of emerged during the conversation. I think one is definitely about the follow-up and the ownership of this data and how it relates to member states' kind of buy-in. For us, this is the critical aspect. We've been paying a lot of attention to it. We've been talking very closely to member states. The idea of building on existing indicator frameworks, and in particular those that have been intergovernmentally endorsed, really is to make it easier for member states to work in the context of this proposal. We see that the data for SDG indicators is already in the public domain. It's already available on the websites of the UN Statistical Division, and also the relevant indicators on migration are disseminated on a regular basis through the websites of the IOM, DESA, and others, ILO and World Bank, for example. We believe that this is a very critical point, that the member states have ownership of the data. You have raised legitimate concerns about biases and other aspects, but I think this is also in the spirit of the SDG monitoring frameworks, this shift from the MDG indicators, for example, to the SDGs and the ownership. Of course, this raises challenges and issues, but I think also that is the role of academia and civil society to look at the accuracy and validity, reliability of the data as reported by member states. Another critical aspect that has been raised by many of you is the challenge of balancing the wording of Para 70, in particular the request for remaining limited in scope, and the breadth of the compact and its objectives and principles. It is a very challenging task, and I think we've worked extremely hard to try to do it justice. But of course, we acknowledge that there are going to be limitations, and unfortunately, some critical aspects which we probably won't have done justice in their entirety. We also wanted to reiterate the importance of seeing this as a fundamental but not sole activity, in the sense that we know that there are many other complementary detailed indicator frameworks that look at thematic aspects, regional aspects, country-specific monitoring, and the way we've envisaged this proposal is really to be complementary to those other processes and not replicate or duplicate, but provide a depth of information that can serve different purposes in different contexts. And I think I wanted to conclude just mentioning again the element of coordination, which was brought up so eloquently, both by Ellen and Jonathan in their presentations and their interventions. We see this as a critical juncture. We're at a very important time, and having worked on migration statistics for 20 years, I'm extremely excited to see the energy that we have and using that to move us forward. And for that, cooperation is key. And I think the spirit in this room today and in the meetings we've had with member states and other really shows how we are on the right path, I think, to take it forward. So thank you very much for your engagement today, and we look forward to your written comments. Thank you.
Perhaps just briefly taking the floor, in addition to what Claire said, to thank you also from the side of IOM for your participation today in this last global consultation, and also for the feedback that you provided, for the surveys, the 3 rounds of surveys that we conducted during the past years, and also for all the comments and the meetings we had. Thank you very much. And I think we can now close the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Merci beaucoup.